Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar. I am Sean, and I will be your host for today. So this Cyber Leader series is also a collaboration between Singapore and Israel. So before we begin, let's go through some house rules. So firstly, the session will be recorded for AiSP members. The session will be recorded for AiSP members, and then you can access them in the Google Up portal. Secondly, please remember to mute your microphone and type any queries that you have using the chat function. Please switch off your webcam for this webinar as well. If you're experiencing any technical problem using WebEx on your computer or device, please exit from the session and rejoin the webinar. Lastly, AiSP reserves the right to remove any disruptive participant from the webinar and blacklist the participants from future events. So now we will be running through the program flow for today. We will start off with opening address given by Mr. Johnny Cole, AISP's president, as well as Alon Rafaeli, founder and partner of Cyber Together. Our first presentation will be from Sygnia. Next up, we have Shiran from Celsius Networks. And then we have Joshua McCloud from Cisco Systems. And lastly, for a presentation-wise, we have Andre Shori from Schneider Electric. Before we end off the session, we also have a roundtable discussion that is moderated by Ron Moritz, the chairman for Cyber Together. So let's start off the event by going through the opening address by Mr. Johnny Cole. Johnny, are you there with me? I think we have some technical issues with Johnny. So maybe Alon, you want to go on first with the opening address?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Johnny, Sean, Vincent, Karen, and all the AISP team. Very excited to have this webinar again with you. And also thank you for the speakers, Guy and David from Sygnia, Shiran, Andre, and also for Ron Moritz to moderate the panel with us. I appreciate your time with us. And welcome everybody on board for this webinar. A quick introduction about Cyber Together. Cyber Together is a Israeli cybersecurity vendor alliance. Main objective is to do sharing knowledge in the industry, across the industry, in Israel and abroad, and bring business opportunity to the ecosystem, to the cluster of the companies, with panel events, main startup engagement with CISOs, doing market validation, M&A, technology scouting, due diligence for investors and other big corporations. This is the ecosystem pillars that we're working with, and bring a value proposition to each one of them, and you are welcome to join. So far, we had a lot of events, physical events before the COVID time. Now switching to more webinars, virtual event like this. Here you can see the team, and thank you, Ron, for joining as our chairman, joining for this moderating this panel today. This is the basic engagement that we are bringing to the ecosystem by Cyber Together team. And lastly is the news that we came up with a partnership with More Trust, an organization like Cyber Together based in Morocco, to engage with the CISO delegation from Morocco to Israel, roundtable, knowledge sharing, and working group. We are working with the Canadian organization GSMC for Mobility Cybersecurity Steering Committee, with Sensec from Denmark. Next week we are going to have a webinar with them as well. And the Global Cyber Alliance, we are going to announce about a partnership and also a webinar next month. Thank you very much for joining, and I will switch to David and Guy. Please have the stage, and thank you very much.
Hi, just a moment, sorry. We would like to give some time to Mr. Johnny Cole as well for the opening speech. Yep. So,
sorry, guys. Sorry, folks. Yeah, was had a technical fault at the last moment.
So, Johnny, are you able to take control?
Just give me a moment. Just give me a moment.
If it's not working, then I can just help you to click the slides as you go.
Okay, just the video part.
Okay.
Okay. Just give me a moment. Got it. Yeah.
You control now.
Here's the video. Okay, a very good evening. Apologies, I ran into a technical fault. I just crashed the WebEx. Partially, if I want to isolate the problem, it was due to my Bluetooth. So I just have to switch machine. So these days, basically, you also had a plan for BCP. So I actually had to switch to another machine just to get back into WebEx. Yeah, very good evening. I think Alon has spoken, and this is really a great, I think, as a joint event, I think together with Cyber Together as well. And to really start off, I think from my side to really just to introduce AiSP, quick introduction about AiSP. But I think as you can see, I think we're the Association for Information Security Professionals. We started in 2008. I think one of the key things really was to talk about this whole knowledge development, I think especially for the IS professionals. And of course, part of this actually, when we talk about it, will be really how we are looking at the different roles within the cybersecurity industry. And at this point, I think as the focus of this series that we're doing is really on the cyber leaders as well, which has become a very key part, especially in today's world in terms of the linkage towards the business as well as the board as well as the management itself. And of course, tonight I think we definitely had a strong group of speakers coming from both sides as well as Singapore as well as Israel, and really to share more. So moving directly, I think we're into our vision. This really falls in place where we have the different initiatives. From a knowledge perspective, I think this is where we drive towards a body of knowledge that we develop in terms of our certification, as well as growing the ecosystem as well across to not only local but regional, just like in this current context. And there's various ways that we actually also recognize, the excellence within the industry in terms of, I think most prominent, I think if you see annually, we have the Cybersecurity Awards in Singapore, but we should push towards looking at the youth in terms of the students, how they differentiate in the in their early stages in terms of a volunteer work, especially in cybersecurity projects as well. And most importantly, I think where we are also gearing towards recognizing leadership as well as role models through our AVIP program as well. So that's it. I think really just to highlight, I think where what drives our focus. So in terms of the body of knowledge, this is really where we look at defining a knowledge framework to help to, I think, basically bridge a lot on what is needed in terms of the different domains. And actually with that, fundamentally, where we drive towards is also to craft out a whole education, or I would say cyber certification journey, covering not only from the general public in terms of awareness, what we do in cybersecurity awareness e-learning, to essentials, and most importantly, I think where we look at a key part which we provide to the community in terms of the ICT community, in terms of the bridging into cybersecurity through our QISP certification as well. And of course, also moving into how the professionals can progress into specializations. I think the most prominent, I think, at this point is where we have been working, I think, with CREST in terms of the CREST certification for the past few years as well. And one of the key things which we drive towards, part of it is from a knowledge perspective as well as collaboration, is through our special interest groups. Currently, we do have 4. And these interest groups drive our connection with other associations and communities as well. So, for example, especially on the IoT piece, we do actually have a joint interest group with sisters as well. So that's really where it becomes an additional way in terms of our members, as well as how the community can further connect based on areas of interest as well. So that said, I think just to really just highlight, I think where we drive towards the excellence, especially in terms of validating information security professionals through our EVIP program. And this is really where we drive towards also actually supporting the leaders as well, cyber leaders as well, in terms of through the professional indemnity coverage, especially in Singapore and overseas as well, so that will actually help them in their current work. So as we know, cybersecurity work has now become more key, and the personal liabilities, all these are areas that to actually watch out for. So with that, really not to delay any further and really to get on to the speakers within, I'll hand over back to Sean. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So so we will be moving on to the presentation now. So can we have our first presenter from Sygnia to go ahead?
Hi. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, Alon. And it's really a pleasure to be here. My name is David Warshavski. I'm VP of Endpoint Security at Sygnia. Together with me is Guy Segal, who is our VP of APAC Cyber Operations. And I'm really excited to be here because what we do, for those of you who don't know who Sygnia is and what we do, we basically do 2 things in life. We respond to cyber attacks. So part of what we do is incident response. We have over 150 team members that are spread globally in regional offices in New York, Singapore, London, Tel Aviv, and Mexico City. And we engage with our clients in preventing or mitigating many of the attacks that we unfortunately hear about on almost a weekly basis. And in the past couple of years, especially, we've encountered and defeated many ransomware attacks in particular. And what we'd like to do today is share with you our experience, not only from how these threat actors work and operate. I think that after 2 years of hearing about another major attack, I think many of you already have some understanding of how these threat actors work and operate. More importantly, we want to share with you our insights from working with organizations who do some things extremely well. We've been working with more and more organizations that are able to stave off these attacks, to defeat some of the more sophisticated attacks that we see out there. And they do this not necessarily by spending millions of dollars on shiny new tools that have AI and machine learning in their brochures, rather by adopting specific strategies and tactics that are extremely effective in mitigating many of the attacks that we see. But before we jump into some of the tactics or strategies that these companies adopt, I do want to make sure that we're all aligned on what a classical ransomware attack looks like. And I want to hone in on 3 phases that are critical for our understanding of how to mitigate these attacks. So what you see on the screen is the template, or a classical template of a classical ransomware attack, with the exception of a couple of attacks that we'll mention in this talk. Almost every attack that we see, that we respond to, that we investigate, I'm going to know what we're going to find out, and it will follow along these lines, these patterns. Beginning almost always with an initial infiltration. So if you take the Colonial Pipeline, for example, a few months back, we know that the threat actor were able to gain a hold of credentials for a legacy VPN, and then because they were not protected by MFA, leverage those to access the environment and deploy ransomware. But even for companies that have VPN with MFA configured, we see threat actors constantly scanning the internet, searching for vulnerable VPN configurations, and then exploit those to gain that initial access into the company network. Now, following initial infiltration, usually what comes next is the phase that we call establishing domain dominance. Many of the environments today are managed by Active Directory. The threat actor needs to control the domain in order to deploy ransomware. Now, unfortunately, in the past couple of years, we've seen several vulnerabilities, Microsoft vulnerabilities, that allow the threat actor to instantaneously own or compromise the domain. Some of you may recall the Print Nightmare bug. Before that, we had Zero Logon. If the networks are susceptible to these attacks, that's instant compromise or control of the domain. The threat actor doesn't need to jump through hoops. They can just almost instantaneously deploy ransomware. But even without vulnerabilities, we see threat actors leverage tools produced by security researchers, such as the one that you see here on the screen, and they use these tools to map the environment, identify where the privileged IT admins are working from, so then they know which assets they need to compromise to install malware on, and then rinse, repeat. They compromise critical systems, and then they turn to probably the most widely used hacking tool ever. We see this in every attack, a tool called Mimikatz. They use this hacking tool to extract secrets from device memory. Usually this means passwords for privileged IT admins, usually. And in this process, rinse, repeat, they get to the point where they control the tier 0 servers of the environment from which they are ready to deploy ransomware. Now, usually at this stage, the threat actor proceeds to exfiltrating sensitive data, encrypting the data, and monetization, basically negotiation. But another worrying thing that we see lately, and this is an example from an attack we've recently responded to, we see threat actors that almost on the night of the encryption, they proceed to target the backup infrastructure. And this is a recent example. We responded to the attack where the investigation revealed that the threat actor, before deploying the ransomware, actually leveraged credentials that he was able to get a hold of to Commvault, that was their chosen infrastructure backup solution. And they leveraged that access to log into the Commvault on the night of the encryption, and they proceeded to delete the backups, which was very unfortunate because that organization did not have offline backups. They did not have cloud backups or offline tapes. They were ultimately forced to pay ransom to recover their data. Now, don't think that if you have offline backups, that means you're safe. We worked with organizations that had offline backups, and the recovery process was not optimized, to say the least. And the fact that you have these offline backups does not mean that you can recover them quickly and in a very efficient manner. But another worrying recurring trend that we see threat actors targeting backup systems. So with that, we know there are basic things that you need to make sure that you get done in order to have this basic sense of security. These are basic concepts, but not easy to implement. Granted, patch management, for example, is simple to understand, but it's very difficult to achieve. But as long as you understand you need to do these things and you manage these processes, and you have that basic level of security. But we still, having said that, we still see organizations that can tick the box on each one of these items, and they still get hammered. They still get compromised by these more sophisticated threat actors, and systems are encrypted and data is exfiltrated. So what differentiates these organizations from organizations who are able to prevent or at the very least mitigate some of these attacks. And this is what we're going to discuss today. How organization and what tactics or strategies organizations use to stave off or to shrug off some of these attacks. And we really had the privilege to work with some of these organizations. We want to share this with you. So what we'll follow now is a list of tactics or security controls that we see as very effective that counter some of the tactics that we've seen. I won't have time to go over the entire list, but obviously we'll gladly send you the list, and it is by no means comprehensive or exhaustive after the talk. Let's get started. One of the things that we see companies do, which is very effective, is what we call living off the land. Now, you may have heard of the expression living off the land in the context of a threat actor that is able to use or leverage tools, usually Microsoft tools, that are found natively on Microsoft devices, and the attacker used them to compromise systems and exfiltrate data. Well, it turns out that we defenders can also live off the land. Microsoft has invested heavily in recent years to embed security, to bake security controls within the operating system, and these are controls that you can turn on in the click of almost the click of a button, and there is zero cost. At least on the CapEx side, you don't have to pay money to enable these features, and you should. We don't have time to go over all of these. I want to focus on one that is called Protected Process Light. Protected Process Light is not a new technology. We have this since Windows 8.1 and above. What Protected Process Light does is basically by enforcing a single registry change, flipping a single byte, you actually deny the threat actor the ability to extract secrets from memory. So you see the registry setting in the upper half of the screen. At the bottom half of the screen, what you see as an example from another incident we recently responded to, where we arrived post ransomware deployment. Ransomware had already been deployed. We rotated passwords. We knew that the threat actor had backdoors in the environment, and we were working to eradicate those. But we wanted to make sure that when the threat actor is infiltrating the environment again, they won't be able to extract credentials from memory. We deployed this registry setting, the Protected Process Light, and then we saw the threat actor live accessing a system, downloading his tools, downloading Mimikatz, remember that widely used hacking tool, and they tried to extract credentials from memory because the credentials were rotated, and they get this error message that you see at the bottom. 0005 in Windows speak, that means access denied. And we see the threat actor trying to use this, then after 20 seconds, they try again, and then after 10 seconds, they try again, and after 5 seconds, again and again and again. And we can almost imagine the frustration on their face, as even though they have the highest privileges on the system, they are not able to use that tool to extract credentials from memory, and they're basically stuck, which gives us time to eradicate them from the environment and find the holes that they used to gain that initial access. Now, this is a very, very, very effective, also post-breach, but also pre-breach. We highly recommend you to do this. We've done this across many, many, many organizations. There are very few use cases where it's not as feasible, but it's a call to action. Highly recommend that you deploy this feature. Another thing that I wanted to mention is about network architecture or segregation. So we worked with many organizations who try to launch, to execute, or implement these huge network segregation projects, trying to restrict threat actors from moving laterally from one point to another or from exfiltrating sensitive data. It's very difficult to implement these projects. Many times they fail. They fail to achieve their purpose. What we've seen organizations that instead of tackling these huge segregation projects, they opt to do these minor architectural changes that really go a long way in preventing some of the techniques that we've talked about. And I want to focus on just one, that last one. It's called restricting tier 0 outbound internet access. Basically meaning if a server doesn't need to communicate outside, restrict that access. And as a use case, I want to leverage Solarwinds. Now, many of you remember Solarwinds, one of the most sophisticated attacks that we've seen in recent history. And if you recall, the threat actors, supposedly the Russians, compromised Solarwinds and penetrated their environment. and more specifically, they compromised the build process. That's the process that SolarWinds developers use to generate code. And what they did was they embedded their own malicious code within the SolarWinds update. So when SolarWinds clients proceeded to download the legitimate update, it will contain the backdoor that will then, that when executed, will reach out not to SolarWinds infrastructure, but to the attacker command and control infrastructure, and will download additional tools, additional payloads. In this example, Sunburst, Cobalt Strike, and Teardrop. Now, we had the privilege of working with some organizations who implemented this this concept of restricting tier 0 egress traffic, and they had the vulnerable SolarWinds version. So what happened was that they downloaded the vulnerable or the backdoor version, they launched that update process, and then the backdoor tried to reach out to the threat actor C2 server, and it failed because they restricted egress access only to SolarWinds servers. They were able to stop at a very early stage one of the more sophisticated campaigns that we've seen in recent years. And this is so effective for other campaigns as well. Sometimes we see threat actors that leverage C2 or malware to download and deploy ransomware across the environment. And this is very effective in preventing that as well. So a relatively simple basic security concept, not easy to implement, but we see many companies that choose to go for these huge strategic projects instead of implementing quick wins and these interesting tactics where they can stop even one of the most sophisticated attacks at a very early stage. Now, another tactic that we've seen companies adopt, which is very effective, is that they don't necessarily buy the most sophisticated or the best of breed or the magic quadrant product for each segment. What they do, they leverage the security stack that they already have by clicking every box, ticking every box, turning every knob, making sure that they leverage every feature in the security tools that they already have. Because I guarantee you, most organizations from our experience already have the necessary security stack to protect their environment, and they don't need to go on a shopping spree. One example that I want to use is Endpoint Protection, and it's specifically tamper protection. And I want to use the Cassaya Attack as an example. Now, some of you may recall, the Cassaya Attack was another interesting attack that does not follow that classical pattern that we've seen in the beginning of the conversation. We started the conversation. In this case, Revil, one of the more sophisticated threat actor groups, they found a vulnerability in the Cassaya IT management software. This is a software that can deploy instantly to every devices that they manage. They can deploy instantly ransomware. So they don't need to jump through hoops. They don't need to extract credentials. They don't need to identify or to use exploits. They just use the Cassaya to deploy ransomware instantaneously. And we've worked with organizations who were hit by this Cassaya attack, and we worked with some organizations who were able to prevent it at a very early stage. What they did was pretty simple. So many don't know this, but before the ransomware was deployed, the threat actors leveraged the Cassaya platform to execute this PowerShell command line. Basically, what it does, it disables Microsoft antivirus. For organizations that have this feature, tamper protection, enabled, and every major vendor has this feature, unfortunately not turned on by default. For organizations that had this feature turned on, that PowerShell command line was blocked, and ultimately the ransomware that they deployed was blocked, quarantined, and ultimately removed from devices that were affected by this. So it's unfortunate because we've seen companies that were affected and did not have this feature turned on versus companies that did, and this made all the difference in preventing the ransomware from being deployed. So our call to action here, and not just this feature, but many others, make sure that you leverage all security features or all security features that are relevant to your environment to make sure that you have the ability to prevent even some of the most sophisticated attacks that we've seen. Won't have time to go over ping, PAM, or email. I just want to focus on visibility for a second. We'll end with visibility because we've talked a lot about ransomware and lateral movement, but we haven't talked about data exfiltration. And there's a lot that we can say about how to identify in real time or near real time data being exfiltrated. But I want to focus on specifically SaaS applications. What we've seen is organizations that migrate to cloud services, migrate to SaaS applications, and they find it very difficult to prevent threat actors from exfiltrating data before ransomware decryption. But what we have seen, and we've seen companies leverage CASB technologies or even ingest data manually and do some pretty amazing stuff by just threat hunting using raw data. So in this recent example, we're working with an organization that has Workday as a SaaS. And they ingested a lot of audit data from the Workday. So this is useful data. We can see what user is connecting from where, using what device, which IP, and we're able to use this to identify employees that were compromised and were downloading a lot of data, a lot of personal data. So far, nothing that reminds us of ransomware, but what the threat actor did something very stupid here. They used the same infrastructure to exfiltrate data from SaaS applications, but also to deploy malware on-prem and spread laterally. So we knew we can use that to pivot inside. We identified devices that were compromised, and we realized, and this is very interesting and a very worrying trend that we see, is that the threat actor was ready to deploy ransomware. They didn't do that because they knew that they did not have sensitive data that they could leverage during the negotiation. So they proceeded to compromise Workday users, so they're able to exfiltrate that data and then follow up with ransomware deployment. We're able to actually use that data that we ingested from Workday. Our threat hunt teams use that to identify there's an imminent attack and stop it almost before they were able to deploy ransomware. But even if you don't have internal threat hunting capability, you can use technologies, CASB technologies. This, for example, is Microsoft, but there are others. You can use these technologies to hunt almost out of the box to identify abnormal activity, but you have to tweak, you have to play with thresholds, you have to make sure that you contextualize to your environment, because just out of the box will either create alert fatigue or just the malicious activity will drown in the noise. So with that, just
time is essence. If you can wrap up and
sorry. Yeah. So wrapping up. So we can talk for hours about the stuff that we've seen and learned, but I want to end on a positive note. Yes, ransomware isn't going away anytime soon, and ransomware threat actors are very ingenious and they find new ways to exfiltrate data and encrypt it. But there's a silver lining here. We've been working with more and more organizations who are successful in, if not preventing, at the very least, reducing the blast radius of these attacks and recovering very quickly. So with that, I'll end here, and I wish us all good luck in this fight. And thanks for having us.
Thank you, David.
Yep. So moving on, we have from Celsius Networks, we have Shiran Kleiderman. So yeah, Sharon, it's your turn.
Hi there, 1 second, sharing. Great, you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So nice to meet everyone. Shiran Kleiderman, Chief Security Officer at Celsius. Celsius is a digital asset lending and earning platform in the crypto space. For us, crypto is the first piece, you could say, in the first part of the puzzle. It's like what books used to be for Amazon before they continued to other sectors and other goods and other products. So for us, again, currently we're focused on the crypto space, but that's really the beginning. In this presentation, we'll talk about what DeFi is, what decentralized finance is. We're going to talk about the various aspects of it. Now, I have to say that for many, crypto and DeFi, decentralized finance, is the future. For us and for a lot that are already in the sector, it's still very early, but this is really the present. This is happening right here, right now, and we're going to see this within the presentation. The scene is really booming, and again, Celsius specifically, with our clients and with our community, this is a place, again, to be at, to learn from, to adjust the current financial markets and such. And we'll talk about examples. We'll see examples throughout. In the simplest analogy, you could say that the current financial system is really based on Excel at the end of the day. Yeah. Yes, distributed Excel and high speed and velocity systems and such, and moving to the cloud and already in the cloud. But it really essentially, from the transparency perspective, from a lot of the methods, we're really based currently on Excel. In the digital asset sector and crypto ecosystem moves this Excel to Google Sheet, you could say, and then Google Sheet on steroids, meaning true visibility, true transparency, true collaboration in a distributed manner. So really from Excel, and we'll see various examples, moving, you could say, to Google Sheet, then Google Sheet on steroids, and then to the various blockchains that we're all hearing about and such. In short, just to define what DeFi, what decentralized finance is, the key goal here is to take out the dealer or the middle person, the banker at the end of the day, from the equation. And we do that using advanced cryptography and cryptographic primitives that have existed for 30, even more years, but they've been adjusted in a way to fit the various use cases that DeFi, the various blockchain ecosystem and such, want to support, and the financial services that we want to provide. We'll talk about it in a bit. The transparency piece, clear, these blockchains, these platforms, this is the key thing that they want to provide in a secure, safe, and proven way from the math perspective, from the cryptography perspective. And as we know, cryptography was the basis, is the basis for cryptocurrency in crypto. And from the web or the application use cases and the terms that we use, from a centralized Web 2.0 that includes Facebook and WhatsApp and others, the goal, and this is happening right now, right here and now, is to move to a decentralized Web 3, which doesn't have a middle person, doesn't have a dealer that controls the system, that decides on what happens. Now, one of the main goals from the business perspective is really to give unconditional asset access to the community, to clients. A lot of people today cannot use banks, or they don't want to use banks, or in addition to this, we all pay banks to hold our money. And the goal here with these transparent and very flexible financial services is to provide all these services, purchase of crypto and earning rewards or yield, taking out loans, swap. The goal is to give access to people that till now just don't have access, and provide it in an unconditional way. In a safe, in a secure, with KYC, know your client, and other methods. These hold for this as well, okay? So when we say DeFi, there are a lot of questions. Again, how do these apps look? What are you talking about? So here we could see an example DeFi application. Most of the DeFi apps, it's just the subdomain is app and then the name of the company. Here specifically, again, it's called Barnbridge. This is an example decentralized finance app. And the goal is that you take your local wallet, if it's a MetaMask, Ledger, could be software or hardware wallet, you connect it to the DeFi platform, and then you can start interacting with the various services that I mentioned before. Purchasing of crypto, taking out loans, borrowing, and other financial activities, swap, and many more. So this is one of the examples of when we say DeFi, these are applications, financial applications that are available to the public. Some of them do have KYC, know your client. Some of them do not. But the goal here is really that in a secure way, in a way that you hold your keys, you hold your assets, you can interact with these platforms and enjoy the financial benefits. We'll talk about all the security pieces in a second. Like we said, the shift was from Excel to Web 2.0, Web 3. And these are on the right, you see the types of technologies that we use today, distributed ledgers, some of the coins that we use, Ethereum, Cardano, peer-to-peer systems, file systems that are interplanetary, you could say distributed. And the goal here from the business aspect, but also from the security aspect, is to give control to the people, give control of the assets to the community and personnel dealing with this, meaning not to rely on systems that are consolidated, that are centralized, that hold the assets, that hold and control at the end of the day, control your keys and such. Now, when we define security for this ecosystem, you need to be multidisciplinary. And multidisciplinary means dealing with all the topics here. The colors don't have any specific meaning, but at the end of the day, you need to understand in the blockchains and the distributed technology that I described. You need to understand in cybersecurity and cyber intelligence. You need to know how to do transaction monitoring, anti-money laundering, code scans. You need to be very firm and knowledgeable in cryptography. And of course, you need to be strong in asset management, accounting, reporting. In organizations like Celsius or anyone that deals at the end of the day, any financial platform or institution that deals with assets, with people's assets, needs to be very strong in these categories, in these domains, and very multidisciplinary, meaning not only to understand the cryptographic piece or only be strong in cybersecurity, you need to understand really how money, how assets move on the blockchains, what's the difference between the Bitcoin blockchain to Ethereum and other new ones such as Avalanche and such. So this is core to succeeding security-wise in the space. These are some of the key security risks, from crypto key compromise, coding errors, various price manipulations, business logic errors. Again, these exist in regular infrastructure and application-based systems. But here you could say it's a bit more intense and more specific to the domain that we're dealing with, meaning movement of assets, swapping of assets. I want to swap between Ethereum and the Cell token, or between Ethereum and Matic, for example. These are specific coins. The knowledge that you need to have regarding the business logic, the financial aspects, how these digital assets and money behave on the blockchain is very, very important. So it's not only scanning the third-party libraries for malware or for bugs or errors, but you need to understand the full protocol, the full system, the various connections between the end user, the platform, other platforms, and then the connection back to the user. And again, this is done with the four domains and with a multidisciplinary team at the end of the day. That's the only way to succeed. A few incidents, that happened recently, some big, some a bit smaller. So here specifically, when we talk about DeFi, we're talking about mainly smart contracts that exist on the blockchain. And these smart contracts run the protocol of the deposit, withdrawing, transfer, swapping, and all the interaction with the assets on the blockchain. At the end of the day, these smart contracts are signed with private keys that the admin or the owner holds. And here specifically, this smart contract that at the end of the day, people deployed tens of millions of dollars in order to earn yield or to take out a loan or to swap against other coins. This smart contract was exploited. The thing that was exploited here is that the administrator's private key was stolen because they didn't use best security practices. They didn't use split and secret sharing techniques. We can mention them in a minute. And then at the end of the day, new functions were used or implemented in the smart contract, were called within the smart contract instead of the current functions and the by design functions that existed. So here there was a loss at the end of the day of a few million. The hacker ran away with them, and that was the end of the story. But this is a small platform. We'll see another example in a bit. One of the other things that we need to deal with in this ecosystem is really fake audit reports. There are a lot of new consultancy and auditing companies that deal specifically with smart contracts, with crypto. This is a young business, of course, so you need to check if a specific platform announced that it did an audit report, did some kind of certification and pen testing and such with a specific auditor. You need to check, and it's harder to check because everything here is new. Most of the companies are new. It's not well-established companies like Sygnia and the other ones that were mentioned, that were probably mentioned. So bottom line, the due diligence piece on the auditing, on the platforms, on the people, everything need to be very, very tight. We'll give another example. Another important example in this space, and this was, you could say, some kind of pandemic in the space. It was, and it still continues. In this space, DeFi platforms or specific platforms are launched. All the code is open source most of the times. And then this code is forked and new platforms with different names are created. So a lot of Ethereum-based platforms on the main network, you could say, were created, and then they were forked into the Binance Smart Chain network. So what happened is that various forks were just not tested. They used code that had exploits in them, and then 10 new Binance Smart Chain companies or DeFi platforms were launched, and 10 of them were hacked, one after the other. And this for users from the due diligence and also from more institutional, you could say, players and companies like us, before interacting on a platform, we check the underlying code, we check was it forked, who did the audit, like I said, and we do, of course, our own testing. We'll summarize that in a minute. Another very known attack that happened now is Poly Network. Here specifically, there were various smart contracts between chains. What you see are cross-chain smart contracts. When you have, of course, the supply chain or the interactions between blockchains or between anything, there are a lot of intersections and a lot of components that you need to test. So it's hard, of course, to cover all the scenarios and do end-to-end testing and check all the use cases or the exploits that a potential hacker can exploit. Here specifically, again, there wasn't enough testing, and also it was a very complicated system because it was cross-chain. It was on various, you could say, clouds or providers. And then there was an exploit of $600 million. Yeah, that was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in DeFi. At the end of the day, the money was returned because the hacker, you could say, was more like a white hat hacker researcher from that perspective. But again, it showed how exposed a lot of these platforms are, specifically when you have the various components. In summary, and again, if you have questions, feel free. In summary, companies like Celsius, institutions, corporate, retail clients, anyone that interacts in the space, at the end of the day, security is a very, very important aspect. Deep due diligence of the platforms of the people. We get to know most of the DeFi platform operators. We do due diligence first on the people part, then on the process, and of course on the tech. So we really rely and really are focused on deep due diligence end to end. Crypto key security, this is something that the crypto space is very strong, even compared to banking and telecom and retail and other sectors, meaning we use a lot of encryption, a lot of digital signatures with advanced mechanisms, meaning private keys aren't stored locally or as is. We use various techniques like secret sharing and multi-party computation, MPC, that you see here to split the keys. And in essence, or in short, in order to compromise the system, a hacker needs to control all the shards or the pieces of the keys. And that's, of course, not easy. Ongoing security testing and monitoring, like I said, that's core. Again, the pen testing world, red teaming, and ongoing monitoring and scanning. Like I said, it's not only important to understand the tech, the security part, it's even more important to understand the finance, the business logic part, meaning how this money acts, how these assets interact with the blockchain and with the users, the corporate entities, and getting to know the developers mentioned. And probably the most important thing is really having boots on the ground, really concrete analysis and response, meaning getting to know the platforms, interacting with the platforms, not just reading about the platforms, but living the platforms themselves. We deploy assets to the platforms. We also enjoy the yield and such that they provide. So you need to live the land, you need to live the platforms and the domains that you're dealing with, not only talk about them. So that's that. If you have any questions, yeah.
Thank you, Shiran. So we have a question from the chat box, but we will leave it until the roundtable discussion. Is that okay?
Sure, my pleasure. Whenever I'm here.
All right. So yep. And have the next speaker.
Hi, yes, I'm here. This is Joshua.
Sure.
Go ahead and share my presentation. Great. So thank you. I found all of the talks tonight very interesting, enlightening in many ways. Particularly the first one feeds into a lot of what we're seeing here in Cisco in terms of how we've adjusted some of our approaches as COVID took over. Collaboration increased astronomically, and also the security risk environment increased as well. So that's what I want to talk with you about tonight from Cisco's perspective. I happen to be part of Cisco's security and trust organization, and we're the organization essentially responsible for protecting Cisco, protecting our enterprise business operations, ensuring that our products are secure by design, working with our engineering groups to doing that, and partnering with governments and other large organizations and agencies around the world to build trust and transparency. So looking at the situation that we've seen over the past couple of years, I think where we are today is very clear when we think about the employee in the workforce and their expectations. Previously, the work environment was a little bit more fixed. Flexibility was not quite there like it is today. And since the pandemic, obviously, with everybody working from home, a lot of people have found that there are aspects of this that they prize. The flexibility to do different things in their day. They enjoy the outcome focus rather than the input focus. And we really recognize that this is the future of work. And in many ways within Cisco, this is something that's been part of our DNA for a long time. It's just that the pandemic has really turned all of our employees into somebody who wants to work from home, wants to work from wherever they feel they can be most productive. To give you a bit of context around our organization and how the pandemic impacted our SaaS collaboration, as well as our security environment, we're a large multinational organization. We have about 140,000 employees and partners who connect to our network infrastructure and our applications and our software globally. We have about 500 offices across 94 countries, and the sheer number of devices is just staggering. Over 130,000 corporate provided devices and 55,000, close to half of which are BYOD. So a lot of devices on our infrastructure. Now, this is the context going into the pandemic. And ahead of the pandemic, when we characterize the way employees worked and how they interacted, first of all, a very large percentage of our population is outside of the US. As you can see, 40% working outside the US, and that's all different countries across the globe. In addition, a lot of employees are not necessarily in the same location as their manager, 60%. People collaborate across time zones. That's just the nature of a large multinational organization. But work from home has always been part of our culture. Going back to the late 90s, people could work telecommute 1 or 2 days per week, however they like to. But obviously that's taken off over time. But even within Cisco, where that was part of our culture, and we had a lot of employees working remotely, 80% would telecommute or work remotely about twice a week, but only 9% did that on a full-time basis. So, though we would talk about ourselves as, being a very distributed environment with a lot of employees being able to work and collaborate where they saw fit, the reality was the vast majority of our employees came into an office, found a desk or had a desk assigned and just sat down there, connected to the network and did their work. But of course, that was a forced change when the pandemic arose. I'm not going to go through it because we all live this history, but across the top line, we can see the early stages of the pandemic. And right in between the phase where a global emergency was declared to when an actual pandemic was declared was a window of time where Cisco went from a few offices working from home to the entire company working from home, from early February to about mid-March. That 1.5 month time period represents the amount of time we really had to prepare and adjust to this change. And this change is reflected in how we support our employees, their experience, their mental health, their ability to collaborate and be productive, how we secure that environment, and how we service our customers. So this is a lot of adaptation in a very short time. And of course, this is something we all had to go through to a certain extent. So as we shifted, into full work from home, 95% of our employees were now working from home. It went from 9% to 95%. And the delta that still remained are individuals who needed to be on site in certain cases, certainly in infrastructure locations where we had data centers and some other locations. But you could see the impact, looking at the statistics on the right, this had on our SaaS collaboration usage. And we, like a lot of companies, there are some applications that are homegrown and platforms we use internally, some we sell on the market, and others that are obviously third party. So once we were all working from home, you could see the number of meeting minutes online went up significantly, about 45%. Desktop video usage increased 130%. And that's a huge amount of bandwidth on our infrastructure. Much more increase in instant messaging and file sharing. So now this is obvious. Everybody is collaborating. Everybody is harnessing SaaS applications that obviously allow them to get the work done. They are looking for new applications to help them work in new ways and just kind of figure out how to be productive in this environment. Prior to the pandemic, Cisco had a more strict policy when it comes to remote access. Though we had a lot of employees working remotely, relative to the industry, we still required a VPN to access everything, meaning VPN if you wanted to access our internal web directory, to look up somebody's name, VPN to access our most sensitive development tools, in some cases if you were allowed to working from home, but also VPN to access Office 365, Salesforce, Workday, all of the traditional SaaS applications many of us are using. And while that was not such a burden on the infrastructure or IT or security pre-pandemic, now when everybody is working from home, that obviously requires a rethink in our policy, our tools, our controls, and how we go about optimizing for the new environment. Concurrently, of course, security threats increased. So it wasn't just a shift in how employees are working, how employees are connecting to the infrastructure, but the environment around us, which we can't control, also shifted. Perhaps we all remember, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, we saw a lot of phishing, malware, ransomware that used hooks based on pandemic themes. Things such as, here's the latest news about some COVID statistics in your area. And as we were all, afraid and looking for more information, that induced a lot of people to click. And we saw a huge increase in that in our environment. And consequently, with employees, whether it was a personal device or a corporate device, spending some of their time connected to the corporate VPN network and some connected directly to the internet without that corporate shield that we could provide there, we saw an increase in infections of hosts, of devices, and obviously a lot more work on our security team. Concurrently, also, as David was talking about earlier, we saw more prominence, I would say, associated with partner and supply chain attacks, in the sense that, this is not something that was strictly new. We had seen this before, these types of attacks, but I think attackers recognized that some defenses were more difficult to get through, and there were weaker aspects associated with companies that are part of the supply chain and may not have stronger defenses, and they could go after them and use that as a pivot to infect down the line enterprise organizations. So we saw a lot of the same similar types of attacks across the board. But the question is, how did this reorient and change some of our assumptions regarding how we protect the organization? The key focus, the North Star, if you will, for security, for, in fact, many parts of our organization, IT, HR, was about optimizing the work from home experience. And so a lot of the assumptions and a lot of the approaches that we had to shift. However, I will say that it's not necessarily that we went 180 degrees in what we were doing. We maybe went a couple of different degrees from some of our policies and approaches, but it was more about accelerating a lot of the activities we had planned. things that prior to COVID, we thought, we had a nice steady rollout and we could do this in a very controlled manner with a pilot program and then a few more users and then expand to regions. Suddenly we had to move very quickly because it was all about ensuring that people working from home had the tools and had the seamless experience that was necessary. So there were really three areas that this, kind of aligned with what we had to do from a security approach. I'm not going to be able to cover all three because of time, but when it comes to our security strategy, it really became about ensuring seamless and secure access. That our discussions with the board were not just about how do we mitigate the risk to our enterprise, but how do we make security easier? How do we make it so employees find it less complex and there's less hassle in their day now that they're working remotely and the largest percentage of the users are connecting from a home network device? Also, how do we do threat management effectively in an environment where our tools and our level of visibility and control has shifted? What used to be predominantly the enterprise edge based on our corporate network footprint shifted to all of the home networks where we don't have full control, we don't have visibility, and who knows what is connecting in that environment? How do we gain back some of that visibility and control without imposing any burdens on the user? And when it comes to data protection, I think there was also a growth in public awareness as well as employee awareness within our company around data protection and privacy. Again, whether it was concurrent to events going on with social media and the elections, as well as the greater amount of personal and health information that was being shared, we saw greater demand for assurance and transparency around data protection and privacy. Users suggested that they really liked a lot of the laws and a lot of the requirements and regulations that were being passed because, what they were sharing with our own company around mental health, around COVID or vaccination status, anything like that had increased. And so they were very concerned that we were doing the right things to protect that, just as our customers would about their personal information. So when it comes to our security strategy, one of the first things we focused on was reducing the burden around getting access to the tools and resources that employees needed to do their job. We very quickly began shifting from a requirement that any corporate asset or corporate delivered or cloud delivered asset that the corporation used, like Office 365, Workday, so on and so forth, that all of that had to connect through a VPN concentrator. We began to adjust our policy so that now those employees could connect directly. Essentially, we wanted to have less hassle, where the number of times you had to launch a VPN connection in order to get access to a critical resource was reduced. This was also important to us from an infrastructure perspective, because when the pandemic kicked in, with the number of users accessing through VPNs, with the amount of data, video, collaboration, SaaS-based collaboration pushing through there, we had to make some significant investments to upscale our infrastructure. And that really wasn't sustainable. So we wanted to make sure that over time, we would be able to manage this performance. And of course, when employees can access the service directly without having to tunnel through the corporate infrastructure, it does. It improves their experience as well as improves the performance. At the same time, though, we had, prior to the pandemic, a zero trust journey that we were on as an organization, as many organizations, I think, did. People were in different stages of that, but this became one of the main catalysts to us accelerating that journey. And I would say go very quickly to a focus on achieving a zero trust environment, which was not only necessary for assuring security in this environment where you can't guarantee that a device will be connected to a network that you can monitor and that you can control what users can access. But suddenly there's an endpoint and then there's a cloud resource out there and you don't get to stand in between it. So now we really had to double down on ensuring that only trusted endpoints were accessing resources in the appropriate way. That meant certificates on all devices, whether it's a bring your own device or a corporate issued device, making sure that device health and posture was assessed before it was allowed access to resources, and where feasible and possible, segmenting that access and continuously monitoring it, looking for changes in disposition or privileges, things that would allow us to very quickly contain any threats. And also it allows us to shift towards a passwordless infrastructure, because users were demanding less hassle, right? Stop making me log into the VPN all the time, and stop making me keep logging into this SaaS service and this SaaS service. Yes, you have SSO, but you still need to enter your password a few more times. So now we're increasingly close to an environment where it's driven by a certificate on a trusted device and multi-factor authentication, and that's all you need to get access to resources in the appropriate way. But where our strategy is still evolving is hybrid work, meaning that what does this future look like as we start to return to the office to an extent and work from home or work from anywhere? We haven't completely figured out what that will look like, but we know that it will look a lot like the environment we have today, that we have to change a lot of the assumptions we have about somebody. We can assume that somebody is connecting from somewhere. We can assume that a particular tool will reveal their identity, or we can assume a certain data source will give us the insights we need to make a policy or control decision. We have to assume that there are a lot of assumptions we can't take for granted. And concurrently, when people are in the office, there are a lot more systems that we have to think about, and a lot more private data that will come from those. Things to do with people's vaccination status, occupancy management, entry clearance as related to that. Next, threat management. Obviously, this gets a little bit more down into the practicality of assuming we have an architecture that is more adaptable to providing security in an environment where we need to optimize for work from home and that environment. We lost a lot of the tricks in our tool bag that we could rely on for generating visibility and control. And beyond the architecture that we build, as David talked about earlier, you really have to leverage the data and the resources you have at your disposal in order to be responsive and adaptive to threats, and focused on the threats, not simply relying on a stack of technologies. So one of the big transitions we had was we counted a lot on the network to give us visibility and control. Whether a user was connecting from the network in an office or over VPN, that tunneled through an environment where we could apply intrusion protection, flow monitoring, easy containment, all of the things that we had built up expertise over time. Suddenly, an environment where it's the home network that's the edge, that's gone. So our focus became really, turned around endpoint visibility, ensuring that, the terminologies we use, we had detection and response capabilities on the endpoint as well as in the cloud, and we were able to cross-correlate those so that we can do very direct user and asset attribution. Previously, we used to be able to do that using, our identity and access management, but when users are connecting from home, how we do that has to change. So there was additional tooling and tapping into additional data sources that would not only allow us to get visibility into how cloud services were being used, but understanding which users were connecting and how their behavior maybe differed over time that might represent a security threat. The other challenge was remediation. It's easier, again, to deal with a laptop or a device that maybe poses a security threat if you know where it is and you have some degree of access to it. So before COVID-19, we really used a lot of DNS, RPZ, BGP, black holing, our identity access management solution to be able to quarantine users, a lot of things that rely interaction with the network infrastructure, which we lost when users started connecting from home. So we started to focus more on how do we do endpoint isolation using the EDR agents that we have so that we can block their communications if we detect a threat. How do we use the DNS layer to provide us better containment as well as better security? And then how do you do forensics? With a device that is at a user's home and you need to extract data from the hard drive, we had to figure out some different ways that we could get that data to our security team, in order to be able to handle. And that also deals with remote wipe and restore, where that was more of an IT managed activity. Now we had to work with IT to figure out how we could do more automated processes around that. And the final piece that I'll mention around threat management, it really has to do with the people dimension. Our Security Operations Center is a global organization. We say we have one SOC. It's a global SOC. It's a virtual SOC. But in reality, it is a bunch of offices in different countries around the globe for a 24/7 follow the sun model. People were used to being able to sit down in a room and reach out to each other to get insights, feedback. IT and our security team worked a little bit at arm's length, like, hey, we're going to give you, some information about where the threats are, but it's your responsibility to maybe go deal with some vulnerability management or to deal with endpoints that are, not, cogent or coherent on the network, things that need to be addressed in that form factor. So, working in an remote environment meant we had to do enhanced collaboration within the team and between the teams. So they became incredibly dependent on, your Slack, or in our case, WebEx or Microsoft Teams, all of these different applications that allowed for instant communications, but also developing new protocols around how you share information, how you set up teams, to work on certain projects, and how do you keep morale up when people who were used to seeing each other and collaborating quite closely can't do that anymore. We also had to update a lot of our playbooks. So I think like a lot of modern security environments, we focus on automation to the greatest extent we can, that we don't want an analyst to have to touch something if they don't have to. And if they do, they are presented with all of the relevant details they need. What is the device? What is the user? What is the application? Everything they need to maybe triage and then take action. And with a shift in the underlying controls and where we could gain visibility from, we had to go back and re-architect some of our playbooks so that we could maintain the same level of automation and fidelity associated with that, but also create a lot of new playbooks that dealt with use cases that we really hadn't seen before. Certainly, obviously, the increase in supply chain security threats against our own network as well. There were new playbooks we had to build out of that. So I believe I'm at the end of my time here. What I wanted to leave you with is just a link or a resource you could follow up with to learn more about what we do inside of Cisco to protect ourselves and the different environments we have, the different processes, tools, and technologies we use. So I would invite you to visit trust.cisco.com. It's our trust center, and there's a lot of good information that goes into greater depth than what I've been able to share here today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the moderator, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. So next up, we have Andre, who is going to be presenting about a day in the life as a CISO. So Andre, please.
All right. Can you hear me okay? So thank you very much to AiSP and Alon at Cyber Together for this opportunity to do a little bit of knowledge sharing with you guys. I hope everyone's enjoying the session so far. Certainly the speakers before me have been very, very interesting. I personally learned a little bit here and there as well. Before I get into a day in the life of a CISO, and again, this topic isn't about me necessarily, but really about the challenges facing a regional CISO at Schneider Electric. I think it's important to give a little bit of background as well, because without some context, it's just going to sound very biographical, right? So just to kind of put some context around a typical CISO's day at Schneider, it's important to also to speak a little bit about why we do what we do before we get into the what we do. So some information about Schneider in general. Schneider divides the world into 4 zones. And this is cybersecurity, how we divide cybersecurity around the world. So we have North America region, I should say, which includes South America. We have Europe, Middle East, and Africa. It's another zone. Asia Pacific, which is the zone that I cover, and a new zone that we've just created very recently, which is China. So we kind of split off China into its own zone at the moment. The reason being that China has a bit more special focus at the moment due to some of the complex compliance requirements, and of course, other factors as well, like the culture and languages. Having a CISO in Beijing is certainly beneficial from a strategic perspective in terms of how to govern China more effectively. I also want to mention that when I get into the CISO mandate for Schneider's regional CISOs, keep in mind that this is very much Schneider's perspective and Schneider's approach to cybersecurity. Other companies' CISO mandates are going to be different. And that's because other enterprises, other businesses have different priorities. And their cybersecurity programs are going to be geared, hopefully, towards their goals. But these are the goals of for Schneider. So as I go through these, just remember this isn't a template or a cookie cutter that you can apply to your enterprise. There always needs to be some adaptation for your enterprise as well. But I hope that the lessons that I share here are useful to those of you who, it's probably boring for those of you who are already CISOs. It will sound very familiar. But for those of you who are interested in moving up that career path and are thinking about what it means to be the Chief Information Security Officer for your organization, I hope that this will prove useful information to you. So for regional CISOs, one of the biggest key things that we do is building relationships. So at Schneider, I think this is partially cultural to Schneider as well, because we're a French company, right? So we're headquartered in France. And in Europe, unlike a very transactional company, say what I would call loosely the American style of business, which is very transactional, with European companies, it's very much about building relationships. So one of the key activities that I do on a daily basis is build the relationships with various stakeholders. So that can be the internal stakeholders at Schneider, such as, for example, our senior leaders, such as our zone and country presidents, the head of different business segments, different lines of business, for example. So I build that relationship with them, cultivate those relationships. And of course, one of the benefits of doing that internally is to help socialize and gain the appreciation from the business of all the work that the cybersecurity function does in the company. I also, with my team, work at building relationship with our customers. At Schneider, one of our core pillars or our core values is customer first, so that aligns very well with that. I also try to cultivate relationships with regulators. I believe that cultivating relationships with regulators is particularly important because as a manufacturer of energy management and distribution products and services, our customers are increasingly regulated. So it's very, very important for us to understand the legislation and the legal landscape that faces our customers, as well as to be able to have a bit of a say in the different various policies and approaches that governments are taking towards regulating, critical infrastructure, energy, and data and privacy and cybersecurity as well. Another thing I like to do, of course, is building those relationships with cybersecurity professionals, such as yourselves, via the different cybersecurity associations in Singapore and the region, and special interest groups, such as AiSP. Operationally, you can't get away from operations. It's not always strategy. So operationally, I own all of the cybersecurity topics in the Asia-Pacific region, right? I own all of the governance, risk, and compliance topics. Again, such as for compliance, understanding the changing regulatory landscape, also assessing risk for all the different types of engagements that we have, all the different topics, internal topics and external topics like change management, various could be things like proof of concept projects, such as a new security appliance, new technology deployments like 5G, and so on and so forth. I also lead the cybersecurity program implementation at the regional level. So various different global programs and initiatives which are being carried out in the Asia-Pacific region. Topics such as, or programs such as our third-party risk management. So this is a program that in the wake of all the supply chain attacks that we've seen recently has certainly come into the forefront. And we've always had a third-party risk management program in place, but I think that we've really matured that now. We've had the right conversations both internally and externally with our vendors and our customers. And keep in mind, of course, that as part of the secure supply chain conversations, all of us are typically both vendors and customers, just depending on the context and the conversation that we're having and the engagement, right? Another thing that's kind of fun that I do as well, and fun by fun I mean very busy and challenging, is leading the cybersecurity discussion for mergers and acquisitions across the region. So Schneider routinely acquires new, as part of our growth and our strategy, routinely acquires subsidiary companies into becoming our subsidiary companies. And the engagement there can be quite interesting. Sometimes it is acting as a consultant or a partner for joint ventures, for companies that we may have a minority stake, for example, in ensuring that we secure our investment in those companies by making sure that they also have a mature cybersecurity posture. For companies that where we may have a larger stake or we may have a higher priority, or companies that we have acquired and are now being integrated into Schneider as well. Very often I'll also have to act as the CISO for many of these subsidiaries, therefore driving the policies and cybersecurity program in those companies. Security awareness is also another big topic in a lot of companies, and the CISO, at least in Schneider, CISOs are very key in helping to engage all of the internal stakeholders. That includes all my colleagues, all my coworkers, our contractors, vendor engagements as well, and driving the security awareness program. So very often throughout the year, people will see me doing web presentation, podcasts, doing white papers, doing direct Q&A with an engagement with many of the internal stakeholders through our various internal social media platforms such as Yammer, in order to help drive the security awareness and drive that maturity, covering a lot of the basic topics in addition or in partnership with our security awareness program, which is deployed around the year as well. And so very much in general, just maturing the cybersecurity program in my region as well as globally, having those conversations, strategic conversations and operational conversations at a global level as well, because it's all interactive and we're all part of the same ecosystem, all part of the same company. Finally, and well, by finally, I mean just my last point for today, but it's certainly not the last thing that I do at Schneider as a regional CISO, is in case I wasn't busy enough doing all the things that I talked about before, I also own all of the cybersecurity incidents in the region. That means that translates to active participation in all medium, critical, and severe incidents, acting as the owner for those incidents, making sure that I drive those from end to end, making sure that we go all the way from triage all the way to debrief, making sure those incidents are managed well, ensuring that there are no internal roadblocks as well as a senior leader, making sure that we are progressing in the right direction, and of course, asking questions as a CISO, addressing the risks that are involved with all of those incidents as well. So lots of firefighting there. Keeps me very much on my toes. I enjoy the incident response part of it because, and I know that's not typical, I think, for a lot of CISOs as well, because incident response tends to be a different function.
Andre, are you still there with us?
So what's a typical day look like for a Schneider regional CISO? Sorry, Secretary, could you put the next slide up, slide 2, please? Thank you very much. So the first thing I do every day, so phone alarm, goes off super early, way too early most days. And the first thing that I do is check the news. I look for cybersecurity alerts, I look for geopolitical stories. I look for industry-related news, not just cybersecurity industry, but manufacturing industry, energy industry topics, because it's important to see what's changed overnight. Right? I need to orient myself to the current environment that I'll be managing for the day. I also scan my emails for high priority messages or any overnight incidents. At Schneider, we have a follow the sun. So the other regions also, if there's an incident in APAC overnight, the other regions will take that first and then do that handover. So I always scan my inbox to see if there's anything like that. And I do all of this before I even get out of bed. So that's the first thing I do. Alarm goes off, which is on the phone. I pick up the phone, I scan right away. Next, I will get ready for the day, grab some breakfast on the run if I'm heading out to the office, or these days, because we're all still social distance in Singapore, I'll grab some breakfast at my desk, which I've set up in my living room. Right, and you can see the background. This isn't the Schneider office, but this is the environment that I've been living in for the last 2 years. So I've certainly come to appreciate it. I do try, and this is a strategic tip here to some of us or the other workaholics in the call. I do try not to have any calls before 9 a.m. because typical day for me consists of an average of about 6 hours of meetings. I actually look back over the last 2 weeks and counted, and it really does work out to about 6 hours. Those are all half-hour meetings, so that's 12 meetings a day. But you need to have these because, again, many of these are going to be focused on the strategic discussions at the country level, the zone level, and global levels, understanding and contributing to the business strategy discussions, and building that rapport with other senior stakeholders. Lots of reviews, lots of operational reviews, dashboards, progress updates. Those also happen in meetings. Meeting with the subsidiary companies as well to address the specific needs, helping to drive, again, those M&A topics. And then, as I mentioned before, throw in a random incident and boom, I have to drop everything. My day kind of, and I've gotten used to this as well, just having to adjust on the fly, drop everything, deal with the incident, manage it from triage to debrief. I always keep in mind that as the owner of cybersecurity, the ultimate responsibility for cybersecurity and incidents is mine. So I make sure that I'm involved in the more critical and high priority ones, but I also make sure that I review every single incident, every single cybersecurity incident before it's closed. And then that's my day. In the evenings, and again, because we're a global organization, a lot of the calls happen overnight or late at night as well. But those days that I don't have a call schedule at night, I do try to be part of, again, that vibrant cybersecurity ecosystem through participation in knowledge sharing events like this one. So a good example of is me being here. And typically I end my day at about midnight. I try to decompress, and hopefully on good days I fall asleep at around 2 a.m. And weekends are sacred for me because that's really when I catch up with sleep and family. Final thoughts, some things to share for you. This is, again, just a glimpse into the complex, dynamic, hectic, and always busy Schneider regional CISO lifestyle. This is the same for all the regional CISOs. I'm not saying, pray for me, but really, this is really the mandate that we have. This is our typical day. We do work at that insane pace all the time. Statistics, I'm not surprised, but I looked it up. Statistics show that 91% of CISOs suffer from moderate or high stress. And 50% of CISOs globally are actually suffering from burnout. But I'm glad to say that I'm actually not, I don't count myself in one of those. I'm not one of those statistics because, well, I've managed to survive another day and I'm here with you. And I also think that to counter that kind of burnout, it's really, really important to love what you do, because I doubt that I could personally sustain this pace for the rest of my life if I didn't truly enjoy it. And although work has become my life, my wife, who's also working from home, says that every time she passes me when I'm at the computer, I have this smile on my face all the time. And it's something I do subconsciously. I don't know I do it, but she says, you're always smiling when you're working. So I guess I must really, really love it. And that's a tip for everyone here. If you're going to get into this lifestyle, make sure that you love it. Okay, back to you guys, back to the moderator.
I think we've just heard a lot of great content, and hopefully we'll be able to fire up some good questions and work through some really interesting and more specific answers. And I want to start by kind of going back to some of the things we heard at the top of the event. As we look at security, and security obviously evolves with evolving technologies. The way we architected for security in the old days on premise is certainly different. There are some things that we carry over when we move to the cloud, and the new challenges that we have there obviously are driving some new approaches. But when we look at security by design, which is really our ultimate goal, is to get these systems baked in with security up front, whether it's software, or whether it's networks, or whether it's applications that we're deploying. There are differences, and as we look at these differences, I'd like to actually call back to David, who kicked off the sessions today, and ask him what he really sees. What are the highlights of the differences in architecture and design that we have to consider as we are moving away from the traditional IT security services that we provided and look at the new cloud environments?
That's a great question. One of the things that we see is that many of the technologies that are very useful in protecting our on-prem services or applications are not as useful or efficient as protecting our off-prem. And there's a lot of data that we assume, or organizations assume that they have, but they really don't. That is critical for these organizations in order to identify attacks at an early stage. So as an example, as the perimeter extends, so we're way beyond the traditional perimeter, and this echoes some of the things that we've heard previously. Most organizations do not collect the data, the audit logs, the access logs, and do not collect and sufficiently analyze the data that will allow them to detect when a user was compromised, or if a system was accessed not from within the perimeter. Now, this is about, obviously, this is about technology. Yes, some technologies, we see organizations replace some of the legacy technologies with cloud-native ones, but it's also about a mindset that says, okay, we need to make sure that we have visibility well beyond the perimeter to identify these actions.
Fabulous. So moving off, in a related topic, clearly the skills have changed, and I want to, Shiran had talked about his role at Celsius and some of the challenges there. And certainly Celsius is a very new organization in the sense that they live entirely in the cloud. What do you see, Shiran, as the different types of skills, maybe the different types of functions inside your organization, any kind of organization really, that is in fact cloud focused and cloud dependent? There's enterprise architect role, for example. What's different about it than what we might have expected from that role in the past? Maybe you have some thoughts.
Yeah, so we have two parallel tracks. You could say in all domains. If we have legacy financial accountants, then we'll have financial accountants that understand blockchain. If we have people that deal again with reporting to regulators in the legacy world, we'll need the same for the blockchain and the distributed finance world. And the same is for cybersecurity architects, incident response, intelligence coders, people that are very, very proficient in AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and such. And in parallel, people that understand blockchain coding languages like Solidity and understand how to deploy nodes and such. So we have at all times two parallel tracks. We call it, for simplicity, centralized finance, that track, and then decentralized finance, the more blockchain-oriented track. So for us, legacy conventional cryptography, and then cryptography in a distributed cloud, in a distributed company setting. So these are the two tracks, centralized and decentralized.
Fascinating. So it almost sounded to me, and I'm going to keep you on point here. It almost sounded to me like you're suggesting that we can actually take people who've been trained in let's say, cybersecurity tracks, right, in their previous work or their education, and perhaps bring them online in the cybersecurity side, as long as they have some of the skill sets, as you said, like financial accounting and auditing or something related. Maybe we can bring them in, and that perhaps is one of the challenges that we really haven't talked about in this session, but where we get the talent to do the work that needs to be done. So I'm just curious, since you talked about these different tracks, are you seeing some of that crossover from other work?
So one of our best employees, he was an investment analyst and a financial guy, databases, SQL, stuff like that. And I asked him, do you want to convert into the cybersecurity blockchain world? And he said yes. And today he's just blossoming here. And again, he brings the financial, the database, data analytics knowledge, and he converted it to the blockchain transactions world, investing in DeFi and topics like that. So that's what we're looking for. An even more simplistic example, again, people that were very good in physical security or, for experience from the military, and they knew how to get things done. They were people, persons, they had street smarts, and then just converted them, you could say, to the centralized finance, to the blockchain ecosystem, which you really, really need to employ and use your gut feelings at times to understand which platform is legit, which isn't legit, how to secure. So yeah, we do this all the time. That's even my philosophy. Yeah.
Right, and I think that leads to kind of another area that we touched on, and that has to do with this cyber threat intelligence. That's been a rapidly evolving space over the last few years, to try to get ahead of the curve, so to speak, understand the potential threat actors and the indicators of compromise and all of the challenges that we have trying to anticipate the security work. And so I'm going to pick on Joshua and kind of ask, how do we put these processes and the people together? It seems like, threat intelligence is something that cybersecurity people, having been always reactive, always kind of dealing with the incidences and responding to the problems, they haven't taken that step back and given enough time to analyze things up front, analyze other data that's coming in. And I'm curious to hear from you, what's your perspective on, how we bring these processes of thinking about things in an analytical way, threat intelligence and understanding our adversaries and actually building that muscle, that strength in the organization.
I think that's a really important point. I think it begins with a disposition of how the organization approaches security. I think it's a bit old to refer to organizations as doing security for hygiene's sake or just security for compliance. I think many organizations have moved on from that, but I don't know that they've moved on far enough to think about it from the most senior levels on down as a risk-centric activity, identifying the assets that are most at risk, where the threats could come from, what could happen if they were compromised, and then what they would do about it. So I think threat intelligence and that approach and that mindset begins at the top level of security. It really has to inform how you think about the way you protect your organization, because we don't have the time or the resources to be able to protect all things equally in all places. We have to prioritize what's important. Then I think when it gets down to the operational level, we look a lot more at how we integrate that intelligence into our day-to-day threat monitoring or our security monitoring. So we have an expert team within our organization that develops and cultivates the threat intelligence. They build relationships with other organizations, which is essential. communicating and sharing being part of ISACs, all of this is essential. And then they curate that intelligence in a way that it can go into a lot of our automated systems, so that when we are looking for a threat and an automated playbook runs at a particular time, it's grabbing from this centralized database of all of these artifacts that could be useful in detecting threats and using that to comb our environment and all of the data that we see. So I think it starts at the top level. I think you need, experts who do this, but those experts need to feed into the processes and the tools that the other security teams use.
Right, right. But along those lines, you actually raised some issues that make this concept, and I'll stay with this theme a little bit longer, this concept a little bit more challenging today, which is that, we used to have these environments where not only the networks were trusted, but the trusted devices that connected to those networks were under our control. And as we've kind of moved away from that, and we now acknowledge that we have edgeless networks and untrusted networks and untrusted devices. You basically spoke about these untrusted networks and access to the cloud apps that are behind them. But what about these untrusted devices? And again, how do we deal with endpoint security that's not really easy to install and control, right? We saw this, this is kind of like an instant rinse and repeat replay from, a decade plus ago, when the BYOD, or bring your own device movement, came into play with mobile devices. And many CISOs at that time, and for several years, threw up their hands and simply said, we can't control this. Now we've got Chromebooks, we've got a lot of personal equipment that's connecting to these networks, a lot of different operating system types. And when we have these fully remote work environments, and true work from anywhere on any network, on any device, how do you look at your security solutions and the tools that you have in your bags? And, what are we going to do? What are the tricks that are going to work? What are the tools that are going to work? What do we do when we have this kind of environment?
I think that's a good question for David and maybe others to come in on. But I can tell you that that we have to accept that there is a level of visibility and control that we've lost, but we have to look for new opportunities. And I think with the use of cloud, and as David kind of referred to this before, there are a lot of APIs that we can tap into and a lot of things that we can integrate with to get a sense of the access and use of our resources in the cloud and begin to model for anomalies. I think we have to apply a lot of anomaly detection, tune our playbooks around that. We also do a lot of monitoring on the endpoints, and ultimately it's about the correlation between those two areas. There never has been a silver bullet to any of this, but I think it's just recognizing that we have to look at those two endpoints, the cloud and the device endpoint. We have a lot of technologies that allow us to increasingly assess the trustworthiness of the posture. But then if we start with the assumption that there is no trust and we look to build up that trust on a continuous basis and track it over time, then I think we begin to model an environment where we allow access as needed. Segmentation comes into it. There's so many technologies that come together. David, why don't you jump in too?
I think that's spot on, Joshua. And beyond that, I will only add that there's also a matter of expertise and know-how in the adversarial perspective. So we've seen attacks, not necessarily ransomware related, on cloud infrastructure or services that look nothing like classical attacks that we've mentioned. And when you analyze the timeline, there's nothing there that even mentions Mimikatz, Active Directory, Bloodhound, all these tools that we hear about. So many of the security teams that today may have amazing visibility on cloud infrastructure because they collect all the data and they've integrated technologies, they wouldn't know how to analyze or even identify an attack because it's so far out there than what we're seeing on a daily basis. You have to have a very, 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 very deep understanding of how DevOps teams work and operate, or how to manage and deploy infrastructure, how to manage and deploy CI/CD pipelines. Code is a big part of that. So yes, it's technology, as Joshua mentioned, but also you have to make sure that the security team members now practice, exercise how to detect and defeat attacks against cloud environments. It's critical.
Right. Actually, there's a related thought that I had on that concept because, we always talk about deploying more and more security and adding capabilities and adding resources. And there is the counter argument that, when is enough enough, right? There's that balance, that very fine balance. It's a very hard line to walk between security and performance or security and cost. And this predates anything we've done in technology. Obviously, you walk into New York City and people have 6 or 7 deadbolts on their door. That's you have to unbolt 6 or 7 6 or 7 different keys to get into your apartment. That's obviously a security performance trade-off. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we worried about the amount of overhead that software put on the endpoint device. We still do today, even though the devices are super powerful. And typically we said 5% of the endpoint CPU was really the max that security could expect to demand. So you're dealing with this as well, and you talked about it not only in the CPU resource processing power and but also the people resources, the services and things like that. And I was wondering if you could share some thoughts about your experiences on how organizations that you work with have dealt with this dilemma of balance between security and performance.
So maybe before David starts, I'll start by saying that for most organizations, it's not about how much they have invested in their security stack, but in most cases of how good are they in using those tremendous investments they have made. It's not only that, in many cases, we've seen many, I would say, minor misconfigurations and things that could have done easily way better and prevent the next attack. And that's something that we see again and again with organizations. When it comes to the business versus security considerations, I think that we are way beyond this discussion nowadays. CISOs are not anymore those guys that are next to the guard in the gate, and they're there to disturb the entry to the premises. They're there as a business enabler. They're there as a part of the higher management. And by the way, we see difference between organizations that count the CISO as a part of the business lines. By the way, one of the largest banks in Singapore, for instance, has a CISO for each major business lines embedded within the business lines, reporting directly to the CEO of the business line. That makes a difference. That makes a real difference. But if I need to take 2 main points from this long, 3 minutes manifest, first, before running to buy the next tool, have better use of the thing that you already bought. Most of the improvements the organization needs to do are about people and processes and not about technology at all. Many of the attacks that we see are with minor misconfigurations and not about missing tools. Second, the key for dealing with business versus security considerations is to appreciate the role of the CISO and to have the CISO within the inner circle of decision makers when it comes to business-wise. That makes a difference.
If I could throw in a comment on that, I really couldn't agree more. And working for a company that sells a lot of these tools, maybe if any of our salespeople would be on right now, I won't get any Christmas cards from them. But when it comes to our focus in time inside the security organization, our focus is protecting the enterprise, not making sure we're adopting all the tools that we sell or that are available out there in the industry. First of all, we do look for things that integrate with our environment. We don't want to buy something that then becomes another mouth we have to feed in a very individual way. It has to demonstrate effectiveness and additional net new value that we didn't have, but also integrate with our environment. It has to be automatable. And obviously, there are a lot of systems that we have used that aren't so sexy or fancy. By an anecdote, a lot of times our salespeople want to showcase what we do to protect Cisco. And I think there's some great practices and experience and war stories we can share. But they sometimes are like, how come you guys aren't using this XDR technology that we're selling? Or how come you guys aren't using this automation tool that we've got right there. And it comes down to, if you suddenly throw in tools, it disrupts an ecosystem that has been carefully curated for over time. And it's not that you can't introduce innovation or a level of disruption into security, but our mission, and oftentimes in security, is not about adding to the stack. It's about optimizing the stack and increasingly optimizing that for the business.
Right, really great point, because you don't always need to use all the tools that are being thrown at you, and sometimes some of the simpler tools and the less overhead actually gets you much further along. So great answers there, guys. I want to shift over to a different topic, and I'm going to actually pick on Shiran as a starting point, but I have a feeling there's going to be some other points of view here. And this is a concept that I've been struggling with now for quite a while with ransomware, specifically being all about extracting something that you want, meaning the bad guy wants, from whoever it is that they're attacking, right? So that's not a dissimilar situation that we saw, let's say, in the 1960s and the 70s with air hijacking, air piracy. There was something that the pirates had wanted. Sometimes it's cash, sometimes it was political. In the case of ransomware, it's typically, obviously, cash. And the question, and the reason I'm picking on Shiran, the question is, should we pay or should we not pay? Should we negotiate with the terrorists? Should we negotiate with the extortionists? And it started with insurance companies specifically saying, enough is enough. We're not going to pay out on this. And the reason I'm picking on Sharon is that oftentimes it's the crypto world, right? The cryptocurrencies are used to make these payments in order to make it a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to track them down. And what is the responsibility, perhaps, or the role of the exchanges, right, in the financial services companies? If you're making any kind of payments, and maybe there's regulations that say you can't make these payments, or maybe insurance companies that say you can't make these payments, it changes the playing field a little bit. And I really wanted to toss this out really to everybody, but let's start with Shiran. And pay or not to pay, what's the implications? What's going to happen if we choose not to pay?
Yeah, so we're a crypto company, so we have crypto to pay, but the bottom line is that we won't pay, and that's the policy. And enhancing and advancing that policy is, again, keeping things in an encrypted, in a distributed way, in a protected way, to prevent any case that you even need to deal with this negotiation and whatever. So the policy end to end is not to pay, yeah. And if and when, you're in an incident, take things step by step, because at the beginning of the incident, there's a lot of noise, We're gonna leak this, and we have this, and we have that, and it's gonna be on the dark web, and we have more data than the company even has to some extent. That's what they say. So take it step by step. Another day, waiting, patience. Most of the time, the results will only be better in these situations today, because you'll discover that the incident isn't that bad in most cases, or they don't even have access to the data, or it's just dummy data, of course. So it depends on the situation, but bottom line, don't pay, take things step by step. Patience here is key, especially when you get very angry demands or very pressing demands at the beginning, a lot of the times it's just fake or just not real or exaggerating. So these are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think David had actually mentioned a new kind of role, in fact, that's emerging, which is that negotiator, the ransomware negotiator. I think it was David who mentioned that. And so maybe some additional thoughts there on that question.
Maybe I just want to say one thing before I leave it to David. I think it was Mike Tyson that said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and that stands for ransomware attacks as well. You can say we'll never pay. By the way, for some organizations, that will feel that will be very, very much kept. I know governmental organizations, others. There was just a hospital in Israel under attack for more than 5 weeks without paying a ransom. but some others will not be able to stick to that. And maybe, David, you can refer a bit to the importance of negotiation, even as a tactical tool, and not even if you don't intend on paying.
Yes, so that's very true. Regardless of whether the company will make the decision to pay or not, we almost always recommend to do what we call tactical negotiations. There are various reasons why you want to negotiate with a threat actor, even if you have the advantageous position. One, you buy time. Negotiating with a threat actor usually means that they will be less motivated to continue attacking the environment, even if they still have access, and many of them still do. Two, a good negotiator knows how to profile these threat actors. So by the way, we're working with negotiators that they started from hostage negotiation, and then they moved to do this on the cyber domain, and many of the principles apply. You need to be able to profile the threat actor, because if you know that you're working with the top tier threat actors, Conti, Dark Matter, whatever, then you can better assess the cost of no deal. What happens if you decide not to pay? And you can better assess if they do have sensitive information, whether they will publish it if you pay or not. Will they be good on their word? And many of them are good on their word because they have a reputation to maintain. That's that simple. And sometimes during negotiation, they can divulge interesting information. So in the negotiation, they will try to we'll build trust with the threat actor, lower the price, we'll try to, even if you decide not to pay. And the threat actor will usually, if they were able to exfiltrate sensitive data, they will use that as leverage. Sometimes we see threat actors that say, oh, you know what, I have sensitive information. Here's a list of your host names and DNS records and user accounts. Okay, that's not sensitive information. That's just reconnaissance from the domain, right? So that's a good indication that they have nothing. And we can better assess the cost of no deal. And sometimes, but this is on very rare occasions, the threat actor will make a mistake. So there were a couple of times in the past year that the threat actor made a mistake during the communication that allowed us to get a piece of information, like a phone number in Malaysia. We were able to take that piece of information and then send it over provide it to law enforcement agencies. Hopefully they can apprehend them. 99.9% of the times that doesn't happen, right? But we can only hope. So there are very many reasons why we want to negotiate, and we almost always recommend to do so regardless of whether the company pays or not.
Wow, fascinating. I actually see as you were sharing that, I see a script for a new Hollywood movie. You know, we've seen all the negotiator movies on hostage situations, and I could just see a ransomware negotiator movie coming out in the near future. I have a couple kind of final questions, because I know we're kind of a little bit over. We started a little late, and I want to try to kind of get it to some closure. There have been some predictions in the industry that by 2030, the cloud platform providers will basically be providing all the services that you need to be able to provide security around all of the other infrastructure that they're offering, the networking and the databases and so forth. And we've seen some moves in that direction. I really do want to round robin, and I'll start with Joshua, but I want to get a sense of, is this a realistic prediction? Do we think that the cybersecurity industry, which has been go-go for the last decade with so many different approaches and solutions and vendors and products and approaches, do we perhaps see that all consolidating around the cloud vendors by, let's say, 2030 or maybe a little bit after, but just get some thoughts, because I think that's a fun idea, to be able to say, wow, 6,000 vendors, thousands of more solutions, but maybe it'll all just roll into the cloud like everything else that's rolled into the cloud. Joshua, maybe you want to kick that off?
Yeah, no, I think the trend does show that anything that can be delivered from the cloud will be delivered from the cloud. There are cases where organizations find that actually they can run certain things more cheaply. There still is a place for a hybrid cloud environment. Your organizations are going to run some workloads on premises, keep some things back, have some things SaaS, have some things PaaS, what have you. But I think the trend is, as you say, that more and more security is going to be built in the cloud for the cloud or consumed from the cloud. And I would agree for the most part that is the trend.
Shiran, David, Guy, anybody else?
I agree with that. I just add that there will need to be also satellites connected to the cloud on the endpoint, meaning you can't only focus on the data or the system that's consolidated in one place. The endpoint still exists. You need to control keys at the endpoint, you need to control data at the endpoint. So yeah, the cloud can be the main thing, but there'll need to be satellites or agents that talk with this cloud, that they'll exist and they'll have new transformations. Yeah, but the endpoint will have a very important part for, like I said, key protection, data protection, controlling what users do on their end. So cloud is good, but the endpoint will also have a key part. It could be native to the cloud, meaning maybe you won't have AWS and CrowdStrike. You'll have AWS and AWS agent, yeah, but you need the endpoint satellite as well.
Right. Great observation there. Any other thoughts on that, or I'll kind of wrap up with one other final easy question for everybody. David, Guy, anything that you want to add on the cloud vision? Oh, we're good.
Well, okay. I'll just say that we will promise flying cars by 2030, and I think that the vision that will be all cloud is also kind of similar to that. We're going to be in a situation where cloud providers take some of the brunt of the attacks, but it will still be up to the organizations, the enterprises, the small startups, and the individuals to take care of the data that they own and protect. And I think it's an optimistic view. I don't think we'll make it in 2030.
All right, fair enough. So one final question, and it's a pretty easy one because it's really just your thoughts on the news sources. There was a mention of CISOs waking up. I think this was Andre's idea. CISOs waking up and scanning the news sources, and somebody actually had asked, what are those news sources? Andre's not here to share his ideas, so I thought it would be really a good way to wrap this up by round robining and giving everybody an opportunity to identify one or two of their top picks for where they get information about what's going on in the industry, the cyber events, the news, and the other developments and the innovation going on in cybersecurity. So whoever wants to kick that off, where do you go for your information?
I can start. It will sound simplistic, but I heavily use Twitter as an RSS feed for security research. It's very often the case, and this is one of the bad things that we have in the security community, is that have many security researchers and security teams that they create exploits, they create hacking tools, and then they publish them. And then less than 24 hours later, we see threat actors utilize these tools to infiltrate, breach, and deploy ransomware. So we heavily monitor the security community as sort of an indicator. Okay, we're going to see an uptick in attacks because this was just published, or a new hacking tool that can bypass defenses was just published. It's very important to have someone, not necessarily the CISO. The time is important. They can have a dedicated function to do that, to monitor not just the threat intel that's coming from their threat actors, but also about what the active security community is doing.
Yeah, so in crypto, very similar. It's Twitter, Discord, and Reddit. Yeah, that's one part of it, for good and for bad. These are the key sources. And I'll just add, it's more the proactive. It's not a specific news source, but bug bounty people. Yeah. Again, on legitimate platforms and also bug bounty programs that you have, that's probably the best source for information. Some could be fake, some could be less. But yeah. Having human agents, you could say, that's what they do, look for problems. That's a good source.
I've got an RSS reader on my iPhone. Maybe I'm a bit more traditional in the sense that I wake up and I just go through my RSS feed and I start looking at, the articles that are coming out from different sites I follow. I follow Bleeping Computer, Dark Reading, even the Registry. Just it's sometimes entertaining to see what they come up with there. And a number of newsletters that come out from various certs and things like that, as well as some associations, AiSP, I get news from them. So, it's really hard to say. I curated my list a long time ago, and it's just a grab bag of some fairly well-known blogging sites, news sites that I just go through, scroll through in the morning, and if there's something that I find interesting, I save it for read later, and then I pick it up on my computer.
Well, I'm using Twitter as well in most cases, but I also have the secret Israeli weapon, which is the WhatsApp groups. Well, it sounds funny, but you'll find there everything.
I don't know if you can still hear me. I've lost my sound, so I don't know where we are. So with that, I guess I'll just thank everybody. If there's any other comments that people have, I'm just not hearing them, so I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Guy, would you like to finalize? You wanted to say something?
No,
Okay.
I just said that the Israeli WhatsApp groups are the secret weapon when it comes to threat intel. As long as you don't mix them with your family groups.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you to the speakers, the panelists, AiSP team, and please stay tuned for the next event, webinar together, a joint event with AiSP in next quarter. Thank you, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.
So we've come to an end. So these are our upcoming events that will be posted on our social media platform as well. If anyone is interested, feel free to take a look and register for them as well. And so this is our upcoming knowledge series event in December. So with that, just want to give a big thank you to everyone who attended the session today, and we hope that everyone has gained some insights into the issues discussed today. Thank you.